Hello, everyone. Welcome to our class. Today, let's continue to talk about how to handle your signal. Actually, today we will talk about a more powerful function called Sigaction. It's also allowed you to process the signals. Okay, so let's start. So if you remember, we talked about the signals details in our previous videos. We talk about this some default action, actual default handler for each different signal, right? And we also talk about how to define your own handler. We cover signal list function in our previous video. Your signal function, you tell which signal you want to handle, and you pass your handler, which is a function, pointers. You use the handlers to process this signal. So today, we will continue to talk about the same idea with different function. And this function is more useful, more powerful than just this signal. Okay, so let's look at the Sigaction, this function. Sigaction, very similar to signal, except it's a package, the signal handler in a smarter and in a more complete way to package these signals. So let's look at the details. The first argument for the Sigaction is sig. The sig is equal to the sig here. So actually it's just signal number. So you tell what kind of signal you want to handle in this case, okay? Then it's different to your signal function. The signal function, the second argument is a handler. Which function you want to use to handle this signal. But here it's not. In Sigaction, we need to use this very specific structure called Sigaction structure. The structure contains all the details you need for the handler. I will talk about the structure later. So the first one, the actor, this is your handler. So you use this handler to handle this signal, okay? And the third one is all actor. This is another argument. If you want to know what's the details about the previous handler for the signal, you can pass the argument here, try to use it to store the information. So if you want to make the signal change its behavior, but you still care what's the original behavior or previous behavior defined for the signal, then you should pass this. Usually, we don't care this. We don't care the old one. We just want to do a new one. In this case, you don't need to pass everything. You just give a null for these arguments as the old actor, okay? So in this case, you will know for this function, the most important part is which signal you want to handle, how to handle it. Very similar to the sig function. Okay, so now let's look at what's the structure Sigaction, this structure look like. Here's the Sigaction structure. In the Sigaction structures, it's defined whole couple of information. Not like a signal, you just pass a function. It's provide a structure, and this structure contains a lot of details. First one, which function you want to use to handle. So it's equal to the Sigaction here. We pass a handler, but now with Sigaction, we use handler. We define the handler into this structure. Okay, so the first field in the structure is your handler. Then the second one, the mask. This is something new for this concept. If I receive the signal, I trigger this handler. What kind of signal I want to block it? I don't want the signal to interrupt my handler. So you can kind of block some kind of signal by define this field called mask, signal action mask. Okay, so you define how to process this particular signal and which other signal you want to block when you process this signal. So this is the second part in this structure. The third part is just some flag options. So usually we just pass 0 by default. So we don't really use it a lot. But if you care some specific options or for this your seek action behavior, then you should check the details. Okay, and the last part, you don't need to care anything about this because it's useful for like system internal process. So we barely don't use this one. Okay, so this is the details about your seek action, and let's look at the one example about how to use seek action. Okay, so in the seek action, we need to kind of like initialize the structure for our action. Then we use the seek action, this function here, with the Sigaction function here to define how what's the function we want to use to process signal. So you can see the first argument we want to process the sig interrupt. This is the example similar to what we have in our previous video, but we use Sigaction to rewrite it. So in this example, you can see the sig interrupt is the target signal we want to handle. Then we provide the specific structure, signal action structures. So define how to handle the signal. We don't care the old signal, so we put null here, okay? So for this SA, the structure we define here. So we define a structure, Sigaction structure here. And inside the structures, there's a whole bunch of details we want to set up. The first one, the handler. So the handler, how we set out the handler here. There's a handler equal to handler. What's this? This is a function here. So this is the handling function we used to handle this in sig interrupt. This is how we do this definite, how we define the behavior of something here. Okay. So for the flag, we just put 0 because we don't care. So you can see we put 0 here. And for this part, we don't care. We don't actually do anything here. The last part is about the mask. What kind of the signal we want to block when we handle the sig interrupt? So in this example, we do not want to block anything. So there's another function called sig empty set. If you use sig empty set to set up your mask, then your mask won't block anything. Okay, so this is one kind of like a function, easy use function for you to just set like I don't want to block anything. So in this case, because we don't want to block any other signal when we like process the sig interrupt, so we just use sig empty set to set out a mask for this structure. Then at the end, in critical one is this line, we use this structure and we define what signal we want to process and so on. Then we just use it. Okay. So this is the example for sig action. So today is a short video. We just quickly go through a powerful sig action, this function for you to handle the signals. It's not like a traditional signal function we covered in previous videos, because for sig action, you also can define what kind of signal you want to block when you handle the particular target signal you want to handle, right? And it also provides some way like what's the the previous signal handler for this particular signal. If you want to know what's the previous behavior of the signal, you can use the sig action to kind of get the information. So this is for today, and this is just a short video. I hope you enjoy it. Okay, so see you on next videos. Signal handler with sig action is awesome.